Hello chess friends and welcome to the channel. At the Altibox Norway chess today is rest day, but luckily for us it's full of great games that I still have to show you. In today's video the fantastic game played by Aryan Tari and Fabiano Caruana in round 1. This is a Taimanov Sicilian where Caruana with the black pieces will try an idea played in 1993, but black lost his game. Will it work this time? Let's get started. Aryan Tari, the young Norwegian player, opens the game with e4 and Caruana answers with c5, the Sicilian defense. Knight to f3, here comes e6, d4, the open Sicilian, c captures on d4, the knight recaptures, and now knight to c6 is the Taimanov Sicilian. Knight to c3, queen to c7, a new protection on e5, and now g3 is the fianchetto variation. a6 controlling b5 and also restricting these annoying knights that can jump and annoy the queen, and now of course better to complete the fianchetto as soon as possible. Bishop to g2 and now knight to f6. Short castle for white, knight capture on d4. This is the second most played move after bishop to e7. The knight capture was played to develop the bishop not to e7 but a bit more aggressively to c5, because now the queen must recapture and bishop to c5 comes with tempo. So now the queen of course recaptures on d4, bishop to c5, and this is an important theoretical moment of the game because there are more than 1200 games in database, so this is a well-known position. So what happens? It happens that if white retreats the queen to d3, for example, then he loses the initiative, black will castle short, and is fine with an equal game. So that's why the main continuation is bishop to f4, a queen for a queen, and here comes d6. Let's go back one move. Why not bishop captures, bishop capture? Let's go back because it's studied that that after bishop captures on d4, this variation is better for white because there is bishop captures the queen on c7. Now bishop captures on c3. Later we will watch another idea where black will try to keep the bishop pair on the board, but here comes bishop captures on c3, and now the b pawn recaptures on c3. Here comes d5, e captures on d5, and the knight recaptures on d5, attacking the pawn. Bishop back to e5. This is the theoretical line just to show you why this queen exchange is never played, or well, is played but is not good for black, is defending and attacking. f6, here comes c4, knight to b4, and now bishop to d6. Black won't be able to castle short. After knight captures on c2, the rook simply moves to b1, white will regain the pawn and will find his rook in a dominant position. Let's go back to our game. You will find the second idea where black will try to keep his bishop on the board in the description below the video, where you will also find the notation of the game, as usual. Let's go back to our game. So that's why after bishop to f4, black doesn't begin this exchange but plays d6. Now the white queen is still under attack, so the queen moves back to d2, and now what is black's goal? Black's goal is to push e5, but e5 will create the outpost on d5. So before playing e5, there is to play h6, exactly the move that Caruana played. But let's go back one move, because what happens if you immediately play e5? After e5, the bishop will simply move to g5, white will exchange the bishop on the knight, will ruin the pawn structure, and then will simply jump with his own knight on d5. So let's go back to our game. That's why here comes h6. Now rook in a goes to d1, and only now e5. Bishop back to e3, almost 500 games still in database. The most played move is bishop to e6, but Caruana has a different idea in mind. What is this idea? This idea is bishop captures on e3. Now, how to recapture? If and this is the idea this is the beginning of the old idea that Caruana rediscovered. Now what happens? If you recapture with the queen to not have these double pawns, then black will simply castle. Queen to d3, attacking the backward pawn, but black has time to protect the pawn with rook to d8, and the position is equal. So, going back to our game, that's why after bishop capture, to keep the pawn under attack, Tari recaptures with the f-pawn, and only now bishop to e6. And so what happens? The d6 pawn can be captured, and this is the line, exactly the line played only once at Grandmaster level in 1993, lost by black. So Aryan Tari captured this important central pawn. Now rook to c8, white is a pawn up, but his pawns are doubled, and the black pieces are better, especially the bishop, against this bishop in fianchetto that doesn't have a clear path to re-enter the game. So, even if black is a pawn down, it seems that there is a compensation. Here comes a4, this is really a novelty, and the game is now original, and now Caruana continues with h5. The idea probably is to keep pushing with h4. Here comes h3, so in case of h4, white can push with g4, but with these pawn pushes, the pawns will close a new diagonal for the bishop, so this bishop becomes even more restricted, in my opinion. Here comes the queen exchange, queen capture, rook captures, and now knight to d7. h4, exactly to prevent that both pawns are on the light squares, same color of this bishop, and here comes rook back to d2. Caruana continues the game with knight to b6, but let's go back one move, because at the end of the game, Kramnik, who is commenting the tournament, who is making this comment live, asked Caruana why in this position he didn't play rook for knight on c3. And let's watch what happens. After rook captures on c3, the idea of Kramnik, of course there is the b pawn that recaptures, rook to c8, but Caruana answered that he was worried about rook to b1, attacking the other pawn, now rook to c7, protecting the pawn, king to h2, and then bishop to h3 to exchange this terrible bishop. So that's why Caruana didn't play the exchange sacrifice. Let's go back to our game. After rook to d2, in fact Caruana continues with knight to b6, and now knight to d5. Comes we check, also attacking the knight, I forgot the arrow. And now bishop captures on d5, because this knight will prove much better than the bishop in this position. Tari recaptures with the pawn and creates a pass pawn. So here comes knight to c4, that is attacking the rook, attacking also the central pawn, but more than that, we'll be able to jump back and to block this pass pawn. And we know that it's very important, because the knight is the best blocker. Of course, after rook to e2, protecting the pawn and moving the rook away, not possible to capture this pawn, because there is a rook to b1 that we recapture, on b7 we check. So, terrible idea, and that's why Caruana simply blocks the pawn with knight to d6. Here comes e4 and a5, rook to a1, and now rook to c4 with the idea to double the rooks on the c5. So that's why here comes c3 to close the c5, and now f6. Rook to e3, the second rook moves to c8, and now Aryan Tari improves his king. King to f2, and now g5. Bishop to f3, here comes g4, the bishop is under attack and moves back to g2. And as before, it's a bit difficult to find a good position for this bishop. The rook moves away, probably because there is this bishop to f1 that clearly arrives. Bishop to f1 to find a new diagonal, and now here comes f5. The pawn is 2 times under attack, so white must capture on f5, but this capture also opens this possible capture with check, so the rook captures on d5, also protecting e5, and here comes rook to d3. the second rook moves to c5, so in case of the rook exchange, this rook will control the d file, and white doubles the rook on the d file. Rook captures on d3, the bishop recaptures and is also protecting the pawn. But here comes e4, so the bishop, the only defender, is now under attack, and this pawn will fall. Bishop back to e2, and now Caruana captures the pawn with the knight, because the knight is watching g3, also controlling e3, and keeping the white king at bay. Bishop to b5, let's pay attention to this rook check, so knight back to d6, is closing the file and attacking the bishop. Bishop back to e2, and now king to e6. While this king is restricted, the black king is free to advance. Now rook to c1 and king to e5. Rook to d1, rook to c7, king to g2 away from the file, and now b6. Bishop to a6, still not simple to find a goal for this bishop. Rook to f7, and now bishop back to e2, at least controlling this rook to f3. Rook back to f8, rook to b1, the knight jumps to f5, so it's not possible to bring back the rook to the open file because there is the knight jump that will become a fork. So here comes b4, knight jumped on e3 with check, king to g1, and now knight to e5 will capture a pawn. So at first rook to b3, and now rook to c8. B captures on a5, the b pawn recapture, so it seems that Caruana is controlling well the possible counterplay, the only possible counterplay here on the queen side. And here comes c4. Knight to b4, rook to b1, and now the king's invasion, king to d4. Bishop back to f1, knight to d3, closing this diagonal. This pawn will fall in any case, and in this position is also a position where white could already resign. Here comes rook to b5, trying attacking these two pawns on the flanks, but rook to c5, protected by the king, is completely closing the fifth rank. So the pawn really now is going to fall. The bishop captures on d3, and now the e-pawn recaptures on d3 and is a dangerous advance pawn. c4 will fall. Here comes king to f2, but after king captures on c4 and rook back to b1, rook to e5 that will restrict the white king so that the king cannot move toward the pass pawn. Aryan Tari resigns because black is unstoppable. Even if the rook tries to find some activity from behind, for example, if white continues with rook to b8, there is king to c3, rook to d8 behind the pass pawn, king to d2, rook to d4, rook to f5 with check. The king and the pawn will keep the white king far from them. King to g2, rook to f3. The black king will simply move to e2, the pawn will advance and will promote to queen. Of course, it's game over. Very nice game played by Caruana, an interesting idea that was played well, and a game that I hope you enjoyed. As usual, don't forget to like the video, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because I follow all the top chess tournaments. And of course we will meet tomorrow with round 5 of the Norway Chess 2020. Goodbye!